Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We're just going to wait until a few more people have logged online, but looks like we've got a good number of people now, so we will make a start. I'd like to kick us off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, their connections to land, sea, and community. We would pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So my name is Josh. I'm a startup advisor and lawyer at Luna. I also have Kara here, one of our startup accountants. Kara is going to be my co-pilot for today, and we'll be helping field some of your questions. Before we get going, I would really love to paint a picture for you to understand just why we're even talking about preparing for liftoff today and what it means. So bear with me on this. Imagine you've booked a beautiful holiday to Nepal. You've seen the brochures, you've heard the story of Edmund Hillary, and you just can't wait to see the Himalayas in person. If you're like me, maybe you've also watched 7 Years in Tibet and thought, despite all the trials and tribulations that Brad Pitt went through, mountain climbing looks like something you'd love to try. As your plane lands, you see the glistening white peaks in the distance, and you can only think of one thing: summiting the highest mountain. Now, building a business isn't so different. We see it in the news. We read stories of local startup heroes like Mel Perkins from Canva and see a unicorn's glistening horns in the distance and think, I'd love to do it for myself. For many of us, we dream of running our own company, seeing incredible growth and eventually reaching the top. But before you get there, it's probably important to start honing your mountaineering skills. You start going for walks, summiting taller and taller mountains, learning the ins and outs of what it takes from a mental and physical perspective to summit Everest. And as you start to build those skills, growing your business, building an MVP, and you start getting to your first customers, you eventually realize that you might need some funding to help you grow and scale. So you go out there, you begin the process, you start speaking to investors. And once that happens and you get some money in the door, you know that you're going to need to build an all-star team to get to the top. But let's rewind a little bit. Even when you start thinking about climbing Everest, when you're ready to start your journey, maybe the very first step is just getting a map. A map will tell you about the dangerous roads, the icy cliffs, so that you can prepare for what's to come. And today, we're going to be doing just that. We're going to be running through a little bit of a map about those icy roads that founders have fallen on before. We're running through the top 3 legal and top 3 accounting mishaps that we've seen after working with hundreds of startups. So thanks everyone for joining this morning and bearing with me through my love of mountain climbing analogies. My name, as I mentioned, is Josh, and I'm a startup advisor and lawyer at Luna. We've also got Kara here, who's a startup accountant. For those of you who don't know, Luna is a full service startup studio. We help startups and scale-ups launch and grow. The way that we do this is by connecting them to a range of services. We have a legal arm, which is everything from setting up businesses, everything operational, and we help founders take on investment and then buy and sell businesses at the very end. We have a financial services arm, which is everything from teaching founders how to use accounting software, bookkeeping, GST, and tax compliance, all the way through to full virtual CFO functions. So we help startups and scale-ups understand their financial data to make better decisions. We also have a programs and educations arm where we run workshops and events just like this. We also have a monthly series where we bring in experts to speak with the Australian startup community to help the businesses that come along move the needle. So before we jump into things, just a few bits of housekeeping. Zoom is absolutely incredible. But it can be difficult to get your feedback. So I'd really encourage you to ask questions via the Q&A. As I mentioned before, Kara is going to be my co-pilot, so she's going to be helping me field some of those. We're going to have 2 times for questions, in the middle and at the end, and you'll definitely know when those times are. But please feel free to ask questions as we go, and Kara will make sure we get to the best ones. This webinar is going to run until 12 o'clock. So if you need to go to the bathroom or anything like that, feel free. We'll be here until 12. And we'll also be live tweeting this event. So if you want to follow the conversation on Twitter, you can tweet us at Luna_startups. Carl will share the handles in the chat. But maybe our friends, can you also share LaunchFix handles and any hashtags for today as well? Thank you. So We're going to start off by looking at some legal foundations. What we know is that startups make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And truly, most of these mistakes are avoidable. That means that you can do stuff now to prevent something not that great from happening in the future. And the reason that you want to avoid making these mistakes is because they can cost a lot of time, energy, and money. And to be frank, these aren't things that founders and startups have in excess. So what we're going to be covering are the top 3 things that founders get wrong. The first thing is that founders don't set clear expectations between each other from the very start, or they're scared of even starting the conversation about what those expectations are until it's a bit too late. The second big mistake is that we see that the business structures aren't always right. And so founders aren't set up for success when they're growing a tech startup. And the third is that a startup doesn't own its own IP, or sometimes doesn't even know who does. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. To help us interact with everyone today, we're really going to ask you really easy, ask questions. If you're not comfortable asking questions, answer the poll. So pull out your phones. If you're on your laptop, go to pollev.com/Team Luna 852 or text Team Luna 852 to the number on the screen. This will register you for the poll, and so you can easily submit your answers by texting A, B, C, or D. If you're texting, normal texting charges will apply, if at all. Do they? I don't even think they apply these days. You just get unlimited texting, right? Anyway, so let's start with our first, and I'll assume you've all done this. Let's start with our first poll. So I want to ask you all, what percentage of startups fail because of founder disputes? What do you think? What percentage of startups fail because of founder disputes? Is it A, 35%, B, 50%, C, 65%, or D, 80%? What do you think? Is it a really low number, or is it actually quite high? So we're seeing some cool results come through now. We got 65 and 85% tied. Oh, 65% leading. Well, I'll tell you the truth. It's actually 65%. So most of you are correct. About half of you are correct. That's an absolutely massive number. And so with such a high number of startup failures linked to founder disputes, don't you think it's time that we started talking about it? And truthfully, it's a really common story, and unfortunately one that we've had to deal with many times before. So we had one situation that I'd love to describe to you. We had 3 individuals working on building a platform with each other, and they all had the same vision to build this beautiful online platform. At the start of last year, they set up a company and they each held 33%. In the first 6 months, everything was fine. It was a side hustle. But things inevitably started to get more serious. 2 founders quit their jobs to work full-time in the startup. Those same founders put money into the business to see it grow and do better. The other founder, he continued his full-time work, increasingly not involved in the business, eventually to the point where it was clear that he wasn't interested to be involved. However, he still held 33%, but he'd barely contributed anything to the growth of the company to date. So the other founder said, hey, we don't think it's fair that you have all your shares. We are not performing. You shouldn't even be a shareholder anymore. But it wasn't that easy. They didn't have anything documented in writing. So over the coming months, there was a massive falling out. They hadn't discussed what would happen if someone didn't want to be involved in the business. They tried for months to negotiate an exit. But the founder who didn't contribute can't be forced to sell his shares because there's actually nothing forcing him to do so. And the most dangerous part about this is that the founders are just spending a lot of time and effort in negotiations. And as I said before, these aren't things that founders and startups have in excess. So this really took away from them building and launching their product. And they were actually 9 months delayed because of this one issue that they could have ironed out at the start. So when we're talking about founder agreements, the best way to think about it is that it's a prenup for a marriage. It's there in case things go wrong, but it also sets the stage for how you're going to work together. With most business relationships lasting longer than the average marriage these days, I'd say it's a pretty important thing to focus on. Now, at a minimum, the founders that I mentioned before should have spoken about these 4 categories. So the first one is vesting. This is the right to earn shares over time. This is how you can make sure that a founder is committed to the long-term success of the company. This is sometimes also called sweat equity. Practically how this works is that over a period of 3 to 4 years, the founder will earn the right to keep their shares. If they're not performing, or if they want to leave before they've earned all of their shares, they will only be entitled to keep the amount that they've sweated for, that they've earned. This simple mechanism protects founders from each other. If someone wants to leave, there are no hard feelings. The process has been discussed up front. You're all on the same page and everyone knows how it's going to go. Investors, if you are going for investment, they'll often require that the founders are also subject to vesting. This is because a founder's involvement in a business is crucial to its success, especially at an early stage. And an investor wants to minimize the risk of you leaving with all your shares. So vesting is a really common mechanism in the startup landscape. The second thing those founders should have discussed is decision-making. And it's a really good thing to discuss to make sure you're all on the same page about how you're going to make decisions in the business. Ask yourself, what are the major decisions that we'd make in our company? How are they going to be made? Do we all have to agree, or only some of us? Will some of us be responsible for certain decisions over others? And some really common questions are, if I spend a certain amount of money, what percentage of the founders need to agree? So, for example, what if I spend $10? Do I need to check in with my founders? $100. What about $1,000? Surely at one point in time, there'll be a number that's unique to your relationship where you'll say, yes, I think I'd need to have a say in that as well. What happens if you want to hire an employee or a contractor? You want to bring on a virtual assistant to help you with those administrative tasks. Who needs to approve that decision? Can you just use company money to hire them? What happens if you do want to take on investment? Does everyone have to agree to that too? And what happens if someone wants to sell their shares? Would I want to be in business with just anyone, or are there restrictions over how that works? The third thing to discuss is key duties and your time commitment. Having your set duties and roles set out is a great way to see if someone isn't meeting them. Having a set time commitment set out means that it's really easy to see that if you're not working the amount agreed, that there's a conversation around why, and you know what the potential repercussions are. Have the discussion about what each person will be doing. Even if it's obvious, you know, one person's tech, one person's operations, and you're just running the business together, talk about it, because it's not always so clear. Even if you think that your roles are, don't assume. And finally, discuss what happens if someone leaves or doesn't perform. What happens to the shares that they've earned versus the ones that they haven't? What's the formal procedure so that there's no questions if someone does leave? Now, normally the way that this works is in a founder agreement, there'll be a formal process for buying back shares. So the company will be able to buy back the shares of someone who's leaving for the shares that they haven't earned for a predetermined price. Now, discussing these things means you're well on the way to reducing founder disputes. Get them in a formal document, sign it at the bottom. If you aren't sure, just ask someone who is. You can speak to a lawyer. You can ask another founder, what does this look like? What's normal? And it's something that if you don't want to be in that 65%, you know, increase your chances of survival just by doing the right things at the start. The second thing that founders don't get so right from an early stage is about structuring. And when I talk about structuring, I mean, it's the structure that you run your business out of. So the most common startup structure in Australia is a PTY Ltd company. The reason this structure is so loved by the startup community is that it's the most flexible. A PTY Ltd company at law is a separate legal personality. What this means is that it can enter into contracts, it can hire and fire employees, it can sue and be sued. A company is made up of shareholders and directors. The shareholders hold the underlying control in the business. The responsibility of the shareholders is to take profits by way of dividends. So just like a public company, you get dividends as a shareholder, the same in a private company, and hire and fire the directors. Each shareholder is typically designated a number of shares. The more shares or equity that you hold, the larger your percentage in the company will be. Now, the directors, they run the business on behalf of the company. Their responsibility is to enter into contracts and make sure that the business keeps its head above water. Now, on day one, usually the shareholders and the directors are exactly the same people. So it'll be founders as shareholders, founders as directors running the company. But the roles are different. And as the companies grow, it's important to not get it confused. As I said before, the company is a separate legal personality. So what this really means is that it's not you. So as a sole trader, if something goes wrong, it's your personal assets that are up for grabs. But as a company, it's the company's assets that are up for grabs if something does go wrong. And another reason why this is so loved is that the LTD in PTY LTD refers to the limited liability of the shareholders. That means that the people who hold the underlying control, the founders, could be investors, could be an uncle or auntie or mum and dad who've put money into the business, are not responsible if anything goes wrong. So they're entitled to profits, but they're not going to be held responsible. And that's a really great reason why it's such an easy structure and flexible structure to invest in. Seems easy, right? There are a couple pitfalls here when you're setting up a company that founders have gone wrong in the past. The first is realizing that company money is not your money. As a director, you have a responsibility to only use company funds and assets for proper purposes. This is a legal requirement of running a business, so just be on top of it. From an accounting perspective, what you need to think about is, do I have separate business bank accounts? And does my record keeping reflect that my company spending and my personal spending is separate? And that's going to really set you up for success in the future. Now, the reason you want to start looking at structure is really simple, because all the mistakes that stem from it are avoidable. So the biggest reason that many startups move to a company structure is simply to be able to take on funding. As a sole trader, you can't give away a portion of yourself. So it's just not investable. Investors are unlikely to come into a partnership structure. And you really, as an investor, can't get a return for investing in a not-for-profit company. So for startups, PTY Ltd is the most popular option. Another reason that a company is set up, especially at an earlier stage, is that if you don't actually have the right structure and you start building value in your business, if you want to move over to a company structure later, you can actually foot large tax bills. And this obviously isn't ideal. No one likes paying tax. I don't like paying tax, and I'm sure Kara doesn't either. So you want to be able to get it right from the start. And the final point is that many government grants and incentives out there require you to be set up as a company. So for example, the R&D tax grant, you can receive 43.5 cents in every dollar spent on research and development. That's insane. That's almost 50%. But you can only start claiming from the time you are a company. So don't delay if that is something that you are doing in your business. If you're interested in learning more about grants and incentives, we've actually got this amazing grants and incentives directory that we've put together. Kara, can you share that in the chat for us as well?
I can.
Awesome. So you guys can feel free to access it as a live document. We'll continue updating it as time goes on. So the third and final thing that founders don't get right all the time is intellectual property. So IP, or intellectual property, is something you create as a result of intellectual activity. It's more than an idea, but encompasses a wide range of things that you might create. For example, you got IP is brand names and logos. So it's like Coca-Cola with their iconic red and white logo or their unique name that no one else can use. You've got inventions, confidential information. Think about that as the Coke recipe that's been a secret for years. And you've also got software. So think about the top tech companies today. All their value is in their intellectual property, the stuff that has been created as a result of intellectual activity in their business. And the reason that, and because IP is so valuable, it's probably worth protecting. IP can be commercialized through sale, transfer, or license. So if you're a tech company, you might allow people to access your product for a monthly subscription. You might sell your intellectual property if you sell your business. And so what this really means is that owning it and protecting it is super, super important. Now, here is the part that you really need to know. Whoop. Okay, here we go. Here's the part that you really need to know. So in Australia, the law states that the creator owns its own IP. This means that unless it's specifically transferred to another person or company, the creator is under an employment, or the creator is under an employment agreement, the IP will remain in the hands of the person who created it. And here's an all too common scenario. So we've seen time and time again that a developer has been brought in as a contractor on a handshake deal to develop an app or a product. He does a really great job. He or she does a really great job. And a year later, the company's looking to raise some funds. An investor's doing its due diligence and just asks and notices that the company doesn't have any rights in the IP. So there's just a simple question. It says, who owns the intellectual property of the app? And the founders frantically, they'll go back to the developer and say, hey, we really need you to assign this to us because we're taking on investment. You know, it's a bit of money coming through. Can we just get this done? And the developer says, hey, a bit of money. That sounds interesting. I might ask for a little bit of that too. And so then something that was easy at the start to get because there was no money in the door. Now that there's a conversation about money, hey, it might cost a little bit more. And this is totally preventable. So the way that you secure your rights and your intellectual property rights is by using an IP assignment deed or getting a contractor's agreement signed at the start with a strong IP assignment clauses. And that's it. It's super easy. If you do it at the start, you don't have to have a negotiation down the track. If you have a founder's agreement at the start, you don't have to have a negotiation down the track. If you have a company structure at the start, you're not going to have to pay tax down the track. And I think that's a really important thing to realize. All right, pop quiz. I want to actually see who's been paying attention, Kara. And so I'd love you all to text in. I've paid my developer for my app, so now I own it. Is it true or is it false? A for that sounds about right, or B for nope. We've got a couple answers coming in. Well, actually, I can't see how many answers are coming in. Oh, we've got an A. Great. So interestingly, what we're seeing is, I like that you've all been paying attention. Thank you for that. The answer is B. Nope. You don't own your IP. You don't own your app just because you paid for it. Remember that intellectual property must be, the creator owns all intellectual property and it must be transferred in writing if you want to own it. Great. So we have time for some questions. Don't mind my love for mountain climbing again in the background there. Kara, do we have any questions that have come through?
Yeah, so Rob asked a question around company structure, and he wanted to know the benefits of a trust versus a PTY LTD in terms of asset protection. Yeah,
sure. So Rob, I think when you're looking at trusts versus PTY LTD companies, if you set up a trust, most often it's hard to have business partners or have changing ownerships. It's usually a set thing. So most often what you'll use a trust for is to own your shares. Now you remember I said that a company is made up of shareholders. As a shareholder can actually be a trust. And most often you'll want to protect your assets through a trust by holding shares in the trust. And you'll have control over that trust and how it operates. But because it's a fixed structure, it's easiest if it's not tied up in your company that you'd like to be flexible, but in your personal asset holding. Does that make sense?
Cool. And Jack's also asked, are there success stories for startups as a sole trader?
So Jack, yes, but the thing about being a sole trader, and the biggest thing about the success stories is that the reason that they don't say a sole trader is because it's not tax efficient. So if they do want to sell their business as a sole trader, and you sell it for a sum, say you sell it for $200,000, you're going to be having to pay the top marginal tax rate just to receive that money. So you're going to be paying almost 50% of that in tax. So having different structures set up to help you minimize tax is going to be really helpful. So going back to Rob's question before, having a PTY Ltd company and having and holding your shares via discretionary trust is a really common way to be able to do that. But happy to chat about it more if you want to find out a little bit about it.
Perfect. And we've got a few questions on IP. So we've been given an example, which I think is really beneficial. So someone wants to print some t-shirts with the design. They pay someone to print the t-shirts for them. Does the IP therefore belong to the t-shirt company?
So it depends who created the design. If the t-shirt company created the design, then they'll be the owner of it. If you're giving the design to the company to print onto t-shirts, then it will be your design.
Perfect. And do you have any advice for how you can protect your IP from larger corporations kind of stealing it from you as you grow?
Great question. So there are a couple ways that you can protect your IP. The first way that you can start to protect your IP, let's say there's two categories of intellectual property. There's the registrable protective stuff, and then there's the non-registrable stuff. So the registrable stuff is trademarks, which is like logos and brand names. You have designs, which is like the Coke bottle, or for any parents out there, like the Bonds Wondersuit is also a protected design. And you also have patents. And what these are, they're formal ways of registering, publicly acknowledging that I'm the owner of this, and it allows you at law to stop anyone else from using something similar for a limited time, 10 years or so, depending on the type of registration you have. Now, that's the registrable stuff. So you can protect that stuff, but it all becomes public. The other type of stuff is the non-registrable stuff. So you have copyright, you have goodwill, you have confidential information. So for the non-registrable stuff, even though you have some protection at law, the best way to stop a corporation from stealing it is by keeping the secret source confidential. Now, I want to distinguish here between business ideas and the secret source. So business ideas and expressing the idea is very different from revealing someone what actually goes into making your product. So if we use Colonel Sanders, for example, when he was building a fried chicken empire, he had his 11 secret herbs and spices, his secret sauce, and he didn't tell anyone what those were, but he wasn't afraid of telling people about how he was going to build the biggest fried chicken shop in the world. And that's the expression of the business idea versus the secret sauce. And this is the same in a tech company. So if you're going out and showing your product, you're not showing the source code of how you've built it. You're just showing the front end to say, this is what the interaction looks like.
Perfect. And then one more question I think we've got time for.
Great.
If IP is created overseas, internationally, does that change anything? And does the Australian law apply if that's the jurisdiction within the agreement?
Right. So if you're operating in Australia and you have an Australian company set up, you need to be thinking about the law that's applicable to you here. And so if you have a developer overseas, for example, you need to make sure that nonetheless is that the IP is transferred to your Australian company or to you personally if you're not set up as a company. And so the law still applies that the creator owns if you're in Australia. So the investor's due diligence process won't change if your developer is overseas. You need to make sure that you own it here. Now, if there's another jurisdiction, normally what that is telling us is that the law will apply there. But if it's clear in the contract that anything that the developers created is transferred to you, then irrespective of the law, or maybe not irrespective of the law will change in each jurisdiction, but you will be clearly under the contract own the IP, and that's the important part.
Perfect, thanks. We're out of time, so we can move on. We can get to any other questions as well at the end.
Cool, we will have time at the end to ask some questions. So they're the top 3 legal things. But what about the accounting things? So there are 3 main areas that we know that are so important for startups to really understand and get right from a financial perspective. For some of you, these points might seem obvious, but for others, it might be the first time hearing about it. what's surprising to us is the amount of founders that just don't get this right. The first part that we're going to talk about is about recording. Having a process for recording everything means you're set up for success year round. The second part is understanding your finances today. You need to understand how to extract the important information from a simple profit and loss statement and understand what's important to look at. What's in your bank account? What's coming in? What's going out? Now, for this point, you don't need bookkeepers. You don't need financial software. This is super accessible to you just by logging into your bank, and doing this at the start sets a solid foundation for you as you grow. And the third part is about planning. Do you understand what the future looks like for your business? Can you plan for different scenarios? And we'll also talk a little bit about that. So each step here is super important and helps you gain a holistic view of your business. Even if you're not a numbers person, understanding your finances empowers you to make better decisions as you grow. So where should you spend your money? How much should you spend? When should you spend it? These are all really important questions. And the more you understand your finances, the more accurately you'll be able to answer those. And even if you're just unlocking a basic understanding of your finances means you're making informed decisions as your success multiplies. And that's what it's all about. So the first thing, recording. So tracking your expenses. The first step is just having a good process for recording what is going in and what is going out. What's alarming is that even though this is one of the easiest things to do, it's the top thing that we see founders and startups forget to do. And it's an all too common scenario when we talk about icy roads at the start. This is exactly the type of thing that knowing upfront pays in dividends down the line. And I'll explain why. So we have a startup and they came to us. They're an e-commerce company. And after 6 years of hard work, they had an option to sell their business. They were at the final stage of negotiations. They were preparing all of the contracts for sale. But as a final request, the purchaser just wanted to get an insight into their financials. The founders came to us and asked us just to help out. But what seemed like a simple issue in the founder's mind very quickly became something much larger. Since incorporating the company 6 years ago, the founders had not set up a separate bank account separating their personal and their business expenses. Now, you remember before, this is, I said, one of the biggest pitfalls when you're setting up a company. So they didn't, step one, you're already halfway there. You know what the danger is. They hadn't reconciled any transactions. This means that their bank statements were not categorized and verified against their actual incomings and outgoings. They hadn't submitted any BAS statements or tax returns in the past 6 years. So the net result of this was just insane. It actually put their exit completely on hold. And at one point in time, it looked like it wasn't going to go ahead at all. And how terrible is it that you work hard for these people 6 years? For some people, it might be 10 or 15 years, and you're about to sell your business for a great deal of money. And you're putting it at risk because you just haven't been following some simple processes. So what we had to do, we had to go back through 6 years of data, looking at more than daily transactions and figure out what was personal and what was business. So you can imagine the amount of time that took. Then we had to fix up and reconcile all of the transactions to make sure that their spending was aligned with what was incoming and what was outgoing. And finally, we had to submit and lodge tax returns and BAS statements that not only meant that they had to pay tax that they weren't aware of, but they also had massive late fees as well. This is a huge expense to a founder. And when you're looking to exit, it's the last thing that you want to be thinking about. Doing a little bit every day saves so much headache in the future. And I really can't stress this enough. But, Kara deals with this every day. I'm going to let her touch on her recommendations for keeping track of those expenses.
Yeah, so as Josh said, it's really important that you get organized with your numbers and that you have an accurate record of everything. Without the bookkeeping or record keeping, you're not going to know your financial position, and you're not going to know what you can or what you can't afford or how well your business is doing. It's really important that you get on top of this early and you create good habits and good processes before things really ramp up. And then before you know it, everything's an absolute mess and you're trying to find invoices and receipts, spending hours trolling through your Gmail, which is not fun. So at Luna, we love Xero. It's really user-friendly and it can connect to your bank account to make your day-to-day reconciliation process super easy. It holds everything in one place. and being set up on some kind of accounting software like Xero will make your BAS, if you're registered for GST, and your tax returns a lot cheaper because your accountant won't have to go through every single line of your bank statement. It also is going to make accessing reports like your profit and loss, like your balance sheet, super easy. So you can just click a couple of buttons and it'll bring it up for you at different points in time. Another app that we love is Receipt Bank, which you can use to store your receipts and invoices, and it can also send them through to Xero so you can easily attach them to transactions. You can use the app to take a photo if you're out and about, or if you get a paper receipt, or if you get an email, you can easily forward that into the software and it will automatically kind of read the data, input the fields for you to reduce your data entry, which is something that no one likes doing. So if you're at a really super early stage, you might not want to get set up on Xero, but at an absolute minimum, you need to have a spreadsheet that tracks all your ingoings and outgoings of your bank account. If you don't do this, and a couple of months down the track, you're not going to have any idea what that $110 expense was. So you can export your bank statement into an Excel file. You can write a little comment of what that transaction was for. And then you can have a folder set up either in your email or in your G Drive, and you can save receipts and invoices under supplier names. So everything's super easy to find if you ever need to do that.
Cool. Thanks, Cara. And so now we understand how to track our expenses. Let's look a little bit at how to understand them. So here's a really simple profit and loss statement. We have our line items on the left-hand side, and then some numbers for hypothetical high touch and low touch businesses on the right. So the numbers are indicative only. And the reason that we've used high touch and low touch is that most businesses we deal with fall into these kind of categories. Now, what I'm actually going to do is hand over to Cara, who's an expert in this area, and she's going to break down what each of these categories are and why they're important to keep track of for your business.
Yeah, so the profit and loss statement is one of the financial statements that as a founder you should be looking at really often. It's going to show all your revenue and all your expenses for a particular period, which is basically like a snapshot of your business. You're able to say, hey, our ongoing subscription expenses are really high. We need to have a look at that. Or you can say our B2B sales really picked up in the past month, so we must be doing something right there. So you can see we've put together a simple and easy to read profit and loss statement. So we can go through each line and discuss a couple of the key terms and the two types of businesses that Josh mentioned, high touch and low touch. So a lot of our clients at Luna are either high touch or low touch. And a high touch business is one where you have a really high number of contact points with your customer. So services businesses like Luna, accounting firms, legal firms, where you're really communicating with your customer or you're selling your time, are going to be high touch. Low touch businesses are going to have minimal contact with customers. So many SaaS services such as Canva, where people can just download your app, jump online and access your product without having to speak to an actual person. So if you look at the top line, this is revenue. So that's going to be all your sales coming into the business. So for a company like Luna, our sales would be from completing a tax return or creating a co-founder agreement. For someone like Canva, this might be their monthly subscription fee. Then moving down, we have our direct costs. So direct costs are expenses that can be traced directly back to the product or directly linked to delivering the product to the customer. So if we want to go through our examples that we've been using, Luna's direct costs would be their employee wages, while Canva's would be their hosting and their licensing fees. So if Canva didn't pay their website hosting fee, they wouldn't have a website and customers couldn't access their services. And we split the direct costs out from the operational expenses because it gives us our gross profit, which is a really important number to understand and be across as a founder. So as I said, your gross profit is your revenue minus your direct costs. And this number tells you how profitable your product is or how much money you make from each sale. Another way to look at it is how efficient is your business. So that's often expressed as a percentage, which is known as your gross profit margin. your gross profit margin, it can vary from industry to industry, especially between high touch and low touch businesses. Typically, low touch businesses will have a higher gross profit margin compared to low touch. So if you want to if you're going to do a quick Google and see what's the average gross profit margin, you need to make sure that you're comparing yourself to businesses who are in the same industry and that have a similar business model. So you need to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges, because you might freak yourself out a little bit and that's not what you want. So moving on, our next line is operating expenses, which are going to be all your day-to-day expenses or the cost of doing business. So this is going to include things like rent, insurance, depreciation, any admin wages that you might be paying. So pretty much any expenses that aren't included in your direct costs. And then our last line at the bottom is going to be what's left over, and that's your profit. So we have revenue minus direct costs equals gross profit, and then gross profit minus operating expenses gives you your profit. It's important to note that while your profit isn't always going to match the number in your bank account, because profit and cash are two really different things, which is something you really need to understand. You need to make sure that you're looking at the right one at the right time and for the right reason. So while it's really great to be profitable, if you can't pay your staff their wages, if you can't pay your suppliers to get your product, or if you can't pay your rent, you're not in a great position. So just because your profit and loss statement might say that you have $10,000 at the end of the month, that doesn't mean that you're going to have $10,000 in your bank account. And that can be because of a number of reasons. So you might have paid bills this period that were from a previous period. Your customers might not have paid you on time, or you might have purchased a large amount of inventory, which isn't even showing on your profit and loss statement. So for example, we might invoice a customer in June, but they don't pay us until July, or if they're really bad, they might not pay us until August. So things like that can skew your cash inflow and cash outflow compared to what your profit and loss is showing you. So when you're looking at your cash flow, you need to try and work out, if you're trying to work out your burn rate or when you're going to run out of money, it's important that you be really conservative. You want to be brutally honest and you want to understand your actual position so you can make better decisions. If you're tempted to make the number look better, you're only setting yourself up for failure. You're only lying to yourself. So it's critical as a startup that you know how much money is in your bank and how long that's going to last you.
Yeah, great. And I think, let's be honest with the founders here. It's more than likely at some point in time, you're probably not going to be managing your own books, which is totally okay. But understanding what you're looking at, being close to your numbers, means you can actually assess and see what's happening and decide from an informed position whether it's as you expected or not. And that's really important as well. And what's really powerful about the information about profit and loss and cash is that you can use these numbers to understand three really important metrics. The first is, what's my cash position? How much money do I have in the bank, as separate from profit and loss? It's telling you what's actually there and available. This is insanely simple, but if you're not close enough to your numbers, you're not checking in on them often enough, it can really run away from you. And you don't want to be in that position. The second is, how much are you using each month? What's your burn rate? And this is a really common question that you might get asked if you're chatting to investors. All this is really asking is what is your revenue minus your expenses each month? For the numbers people in the room, if you have $20,000 worth of revenue and $30,000 worth of expenses, you subtract revenue from expenses and your burn rate is you subtract expenses from revenue and your burn rate is $10,000 per month. So that's a really simple thing to do. But for some businesses at an early stage, maybe your revenue is lumpy. Maybe you don't have customers every month. Some months are going to be higher. Some months are going to be lower. This can happen when, as I said, customers, it might happen because you have these one-off costs. Like, I don't know, you have a legal fees to pay and they're a little bit higher than what your average expenses might be. And so what you might do is take burn rate, but average it over the previous 3 months. So you can say, how much am I spending on average each month based on the last 3 months? Burn rate is really just so you have an idea of how much you're spending. And then what burn rate allows you to do is calculate runway. It allows you to understand how much money do I have until I run out. And the way you work this out is by taking the amount of money in your bank account and dividing it by your average burn rate. It's so simple, but really powerful and important that you're across all the time. Now, often founders will look at their runway and try and work their numbers so it looks like their runway is super long and the money's going to last as long as possible. But it isn't who has the longest runway wins. It's really a metric so you can understand how long your cash will last. It's not for vanity. And we know that no money is no business. So it's really a metric. It's really important that you don't fool yourself. As Kara said, be honest, use it as a sense checker. How long is my money going to last? So again, for the numbers people, if I have $100,000 in my bank and I have an average burn rate of $10,000 per month, that means my runway, or the amount, how long my cash is going to last, is 10 months. Great. So we have burn rate, we have runway, and we can figure this out from our previous month's data. Now we want to understand we now understand how to record our expenses and how to make sense of those numbers coming in. So final chance to participate. I'm actually awarding points for this one. So what is the top thing that you think keeps founders awake at night? What is the top thing that keeps founders awake at night? Text in, what is it that you think is like the absolute scariest thing for a founder? Okay, we're getting a few responses in here. Is this a loaded question? I'm not sure. Great. Okay. So I think our thinking is aligned. Right. So thank you for responding. Whoever responded, you all get at least 3 points each. Kara, maybe we can organize 4. I don't know.
Maybe within budget.
Great. So we've got a budget of 4 points for everyone. Thanks for participating. A startup muster report in 2018 said the top thing that keeps founders awake at night is financial concerns. This is massive. It's not revenue, it's not growth, but it's the core of how our business is doing that keeps us up at night. And so one step that founders can take to help alleviate those pressures is forecasting. Forecasting is something that we really get asked a lot about. And just like the weatherman uses weather data to predict whether there's going to be snow on top of that mountain you want to climb, you can use financial data to predict a whole bunch of things about your business. A financial forecast is a tool that unlocks a whole heap of potential. It helps you plan and it helps you grow, helps you understand your risks and also what you need to focus on. As you can imagine, this type of information is incredible for a startup. So for example, using the information that we had before, instead of assuming that my burn rate is going to be the same each month, my forecast might change my burn rate in any month because my revenue increases. So then I can have a more detailed understanding of how these increases impact my cash position, the money in my bank. But as you know, predicting the future is kind of hard. None of us are magicians, and getting a forecast right almost never happens. But the art is doing it enough and getting it as close to perfect as possible. So what is a forecast? Really, it's predicting future business performance by taking into account the things we've already discussed. Having all this stuff sorted, you're already halfway there. So it's taking into account revenue, direct costs, gross profit, operating expenditure, and profit. And to start building your forecast, if you have good foundations, so you've got a process for recording and categorizing all of your expenses. So this is where accounting software can really help. You'll likely have the basic building blocks to start building a simple forecast. To get started at the most basic level, you can pop the categories into 0, into a spreadsheet and start tweaking your numbers. You can start to see, do your costs reduce as they scale? Can you make assumptions that your costs will reduce as they scale? Do you need to go about finding another supplier? What do you need to do to ensure you can maintain 10% growth each month? What if you want to get to 50%? And there are also other more complex ways to build a forecast, which I also recommend exploring. So you can use driver trees to help you understand the underlying assumptions for each line item on the slide. I think it's easy we're going to share a forecast with you, a template forecast that you can use, and also some examples of what a driver tree looks like. So you can start going about building that for your business and help you take the steps to building a forecast. Understand for a forecast, it's not like a set and forget thing. You don't build it once and have it for the whole year. You're constantly updating it. It's an iterative process. You're doing it again and again and again. And really, if you've got a good process set up and you categorized all your expenses and you understand each line item in enough detail, you can start building a forecast. And so at the end, and what my recommendation is just build it for 1 month and test it out. At the end of your first month, compare your actual historical results against what you forecasted them to be. This is a great way off the bat to assess how accurate your current assumptions are. How far off are you? Is it because of an outlier, or is it an incorrect assumption? Did I incorrectly assume something would happen? If it's an incorrect assumption, tweak your forecast. Go line by line. Be methodical. Challenge yourself to be conservative, because conservative is better. The more conservative you are means the better you will sleep at night. And we want to see founders having less financial concerns and sleeping a little bit better at night. And the reason that we do it really comes down to 4 things. Testing business assumptions. So what is the difference of pricing at $10 a unit versus $11 a unit? How does that impact my bottom line? It helps you compare business choices. So what will happen if I hire someone in 2 months compared to 4 months? How does that impact my runway? Targets and performance goals. So this is all about setting KPIs for yourself, KPIs for growth. And we touched on it a little bit before. So I think it's totally obvious and you already understand it. And finally, you get visibility over your runway, burn rate, and different scenarios. So no longer are you making assumptions that what was in the past will always be in the future, but you're saying, okay, how is my future performance going to change this stuff? What happens if I do 10% worse than expected? What happens if I do 10% better? Understanding these areas is so important to running a business, especially in times like these. You will sleep better with these type of contingency plans in place. Ultimately, we could speak about forecasting for hours, but understand that it gives you the power to make informed decisions in the future and ultimately build a better and stronger startup. Oh, all right. We've been through a lot of content today. We've got the top 3 legal things and the top 3 accounting things, top 3 legal items and top 3 accounting items that founders get wrong, and you're totally equipped with them. So we hope you have a small map of what the journey looks like for you and what those icy roads are, and really hope you feel better to start your summit. We've got a few minutes for some questions. So Kara, what do we have coming through?
Yeah, so we had quite a lot of questions come through on IP. So I was just wondering if, for example, if you've got your product out there, I'm sure a lot of people can probably reverse engineer that idea and maybe steal it. So how can you stop people from doing that?
So we hear a common term in the startup space that ideas are cheap, but it's the execution that matters. So you can have thousands of ideas, but if you haven't executed on any of them, then they're probably not worth all that much. And what we say to people is that you can't be protective over your ideas for too long. Now, there are stipulations to that. If you have a patentable idea, you would want to keep that private. But if you have something that is a typical software product, most often the value is in how you've built it. And so think about, how long would it take someone to get to where you are today? What kind of advantage do you have by working on it and your knowledge and your expertise to build up to where you are today? And that's really important.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's always your point of difference, because no matter what, there's always going to be someone else in the market. It's very rare that there's not. So you need to be able to say, why are you choosing me over the competitor?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Another quick question that we've come through on company setup that we ran through, limited partnership. Obviously, you're taking away that risk for your personal liability. Why is that, I guess, different? How is that different to, again, a PTY LTD?
So a limited partnership, it depends on the type of structure you're looking for, but a limited partnership is most commonly used for investment purposes and not for running a company purposes. So they're 2 kind of different things.
Yeah, for sure. And someone's just asked about the app that works with Xero. So that is called Receipt Bank. And there's another app if you find that you're out and about a lot, or if you have a lot of paper receipts. There's an app called Cam Scanner, which you can download for free on your phone, and you can take pictures of like full A4 receipts or little receipts, and you can either email them directly to yourself or save them in your G Drive. So that's another really great one.
So I think what we'll do, we'll actually send a follow-up email to everyone today with the resources that we've mentioned, so that you can access the template forecast, access the grants and incentives directory, and also we'll link Receipt Bank and Cam Scanner there as well.
Any more questions that we could help just before we wrap up?
Great. Well, I want to thank you all so much for coming along today and, you know, learning a thing or two about legal and accounting questions. We'd really love for you to reach out if you do have anything. We're not going to charge you to sit down and have a conversation with us. So please reach out. We'd love to help you out. And we really look forward. We want to thank LaunchVic for giving us the opportunity to chat to you guys, and hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions, guys. Thanks so much for coming along.